Charlie, a small golden retriever puppy, sat hunched in the corner of a bustling city street, his body trembling from both fear and the cold. The once lustrous golden fur that had made him so endearing to his family was now matted and stained, clinging to his thin frame like a fading memory of the care he had once known. His ribs were visible beneath his fur, his body too weak and frail to carry the energy of a young dog. His eyes, once bright and full of curiosity, were dull and apprehensive, scanning the crowded street for any sign of safety. Yet no one paid him any attention. People walked by without a second glance, absorbed in their own busy lives, oblivious to the small animal that lay abandoned and forgotten on the sidewalk. A few drops of blood still stained the pavement near him, remnants of the accident that had left him broken and alone. Charlie's injuries had been severe. His left leg still ached with every tentative movement, a reminder of the crash that had ripped him from the life he had once known. He was no longer the joyful, playful puppy who had once pranced around his home, tail wagging with excitement. No, now he was a shadow of his former self, his body scarred, his spirit bruised, his fur, which had once shimmered like gold, now appeared dull and lifeless, a testament to the neglect he had endured since the accident. Before the crash, Charlie had been the beloved companion of a family that had once adored him. He had been their loyal friend, the puppy who greeted them with unconditional affection every time they came home. He had been spoiled with treats, cuddled on the couch, and allowed to sleep at the foot of the bed. His family had taken him to the park, where he ran freely, playing fetch with his young owners, their laughter filling the air. Life had been simple and happy for Charlie. He had known nothing but love and security. But that had all changed one fateful afternoon. It had been just like any other day when they piled into the car, ready to head to the local park for an afternoon of fun. Charlie had been excited, wagging his tail, jumping up and down in the back seat, his ears flapping in the wind as they drove down the road. Then, in an instant, everything had gone horribly wrong. A car had come out of nowhere, speeding through a red light and slamming into the family's vehicle. The crash had been violent, and Charlie had been thrown from the back seat, his small body colliding with the pavement with a sickening thud. The world had gone dark. When Charlie had regained consciousness, the pain was unbearable, his left leg was broken, and he could feel the warmth of blood trickling down his side. His body had been battered, his head spinning, and he could hear the faint sound of voices calling out. But they were distant and muffled. His family, in shock and panic, had rushed to him, but the damage was already done. They tried to comfort him, but the severity of his injuries was clear. They had no way of paying for the medical care he desperately needed. The family, overwhelmed with the financial burden of the accident and their own personal difficulties, made a heartbreaking decision. They couldn't afford to keep Charlie. They left him at a local animal shelter, hoping someone would be able to help him. But the shelter, overwhelmed and underfunded, had no resources to provide the care he needed. Charlie had been left alone, abandoned by the very people who had once promised to care for him. The family had promised to come back for him, but they never did. Charlie had waited for days, months even, his body healing slowly but not properly, as his leg remained broken and his body weakened from malnutrition. He had grown accustomed to the cold concrete of the shelter, the sounds of other dogs barking, and the occasional visitors who walked by, ignoring him as they passed. His once warm and loving home seemed like a distant memory. One cold morning, after being abandoned for what felt like an eternity, Charlie was cast out again, left to wander the streets alone. He limped through the busy city, his broken body a stark contrast to the hustle and bustle of the world around him. The streets, filled with the noise of cars and people, seemed indifferent to his pain. He could hear the laughter of children, the chatter of friends. But no one seemed to notice him. He was just another stray, forgotten and invisible in a world that moved too fast for someone like him. The days blurred together. Hunger gnawed at his insides, and the cold wind stung his skin as he searched for scraps of food to survive. His leg ached with every step, and the once vibrant puppy who had known love and care now found himself struggling to exist. He would find shelter in alleyways, curled up as tightly as he could to protect himself from the elements. But even there, he was only a shadow in the city's landscape. Some days, he would lie in the gutter, too exhausted to move, wondering if anyone would ever see him again. Would he ever find a home? Would he ever feel the warmth of human touch again? Charlie had no answers, only the weight of his pain and the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would notice him. But the world moved on, and Charlie remained invisible. He had once been part of a family, a treasured companion. Now, he was just another stray in a city full of forgotten creatures, left to fend for himself. His body was a testament to his survival, but his spirit, though battered, was not yet broken. Charlie still had a flicker of hope in his heart. No matter how dim it seemed, he still believed that somewhere, someone would find him and offer the love and care he so desperately needed. Charlie's life on the streets was an unending struggle, a battle for survival that wore him down physically and emotionally. His once soft golden fur, which had been brushed and cared for, was now matted and dirty, stained by the grime of city life. His small, broken body moved with the stiffness of injury, his left leg still aching with every step. But it was the gnawing hunger in his belly that seemed to consume him most. The days blurred together in a haze of exhaustion, pain, and loneliness, each one feeling like a repetition of the last. He had become a ghost, invisible to the bustling world around him, a creature scrounging for scraps, hoping for kindness that never seemed to come. The first thing Charlie learned was that the world could be a harsh place. People walked past him without a second glance, their eyes focused on their phones or the rush of their daily lives. He often found himself searching through garbage bins and alleyways for food, his stomach growling in protest at the lack of nourishment. The scraps he found were never enough. He dug through discarded pizza boxes, empty cans, and leftover bags of fast food, his nose leading him to the faint smell of something edible. But more often than not, he found nothing but empty containers, the remnants of other lives. Hunger gnawed at his insides, sharp and relentless, making his body weaker with each passing day. But what made it worse wasn't just the hunger, it was the loneliness. Charlie had once been part of a family, a beloved pet who received attention, affection, and care. Now, he was alone, left to navigate the harsh streets with no one to rely on but himself. His eyes would search the faces of passers-by, hoping for a kind glance, a hand to offer him comfort. But most people just hurried by, too preoccupied with their own lives to notice the small, sad puppy sitting in the shadows. He longed for the warmth of a hand, the softness of a human voice, even just the briefest moment of companionship. But there was no one. There was only the endless noise of the city, the honking of horns, the chatter of pedestrians, and the cold concrete beneath his paws. His wounds, still fresh from the accident, burned with the sting of neglect. His left leg, the one that had been broken in the crash, never truly healed. It still ached, each step a painful reminder of how far he had fallen from the life he once knew. His body was frail, his ribs visible beneath his fur. But the worst of it was the emotional toll. He felt forgotten, invisible, as if he had ceased to matter. Yet, despite the pain, despite the hunger and loneliness, Charlie never gave up. There was a quiet strength within him, a resilience that had been honed through his brief time in the world. A loyalty that refused to fade even when everything around him seemed to. He never begged or whined, never drew attention to himself. He kept his head low, his eyes always watching, always waiting. He was a survivor, a creature of instinct, and he knew that in this world, survival meant not showing weakness, not seeking pity. He kept to the shadows, never causing trouble, always aware of the threat of the world around him. He knew that the streets were dangerous, that humans could be cruel, that other animals could be even worse. He had learned early on to avoid conflict, to stay out of the way, and to wait for the right moment to seize an opportunity. He wasn't one to make demands or create a scene. Instead, Charlie waited quietly, patiently, for the rare moments when someone would stop and offer him a scrap of food or a kind word. Those moments were fleeting, but they kept his spirit alive. The small acts of kindness from strangers, a hand that dropped a piece of bread, a glance that lingered just a moment longer, were enough to remind Charlie that not all humans were indifferent. Not all of them had forgotten. On some days, when he managed to find shelter in a quiet corner of an alley or the doorway of an old store, Charlie would curl up, his injured leg stretched out awkwardly beneath him, and sleep. But sleep was never restful. Every noise seemed like a potential threat. A car approaching too fast, a loud voice, the scurrying of rats. Charlie's ears were always alert, his body tense, his heart beating a little faster than it should. But even in his anxiety, he did not give up. He would rise in the morning, shaking off the cold, shaking off the pain, and he would move on. He had learned to adapt. He had learned to fight for survival. Each new day brought with it a new set of challenges, and Charlie faced them with quiet determination. His body may have been broken, his spirit scarred, but his loyalty to life, to survival, never wavered. There were moments, brief and fleeting, when he allowed himself to hope. He would see a family walking by, laughing, playing with their dog, and for a brief moment, he would let himself imagine a life like that again, where he was loved, cared for, and safe. But the hope was quickly squashed, as the reality of his situation set back in. Hope was a luxury for those with secure lives. For Charlie, survival was all that mattered. Despite the hardship, despite the endless days of scavenging and hiding, Charlie never lost the qualities that had made him so beloved in the past. His loyalty was still there, quietly burning beneath the layers of pain and exhaustion. He still looked for the good in people, still believed that somewhere, somehow, someone might offer him a chance at a better life. His perseverance was a reflection of the spirit he had been born with, one of courage, resilience, and a deep, unshakable loyalty. He didn't show his pain to the world, but it was always there, lurking beneath the surface. His body was frail, his health poor, but his heart was strong. He was a survivor in every sense of the word. And though the streets were unforgiving, though the world seemed to have forgotten him, Charlie never stopped waiting. He waited for the right moment, for the right person to come along, and for the chance to once again experience the love and security that he had lost. The rain came down in sheets that afternoon, drenching everything in sight as it hammered the pavement. John stood behind the counter of his small bakery, watching the downpour through the window, absently wiping flour from his hands as the day slowed to a crawl. The familiar smell of freshly baked bread filled the air, but today it didn't seem to bring him the same comfort. He glanced outside, his eyes scanning the wet street, the faces of people rushing by, heads down to shield themselves from the rain, moving with purpose and urgency. But something caught his eye, something that made him pause. There, just outside his bakery door, huddled on the wet sidewalk, was a dog, a small golden retriever, his fur matted and soaked, looking more like a shadow of a dog than the bright, energetic pup he likely once was. The dog sat quietly, its body trembling not just from the cold, but from a sense of something deeper. Its eyes were locked on the bakery window, staring in with an intensity that struck John to his core. There was something haunting about the gaze, a mixture of patience and deep, painful longing. John could see it in the dog's eyes. It wasn't the wild, empty stare of a stray. It was something more, something that spoke of a past, of a life lost and a soul desperately seeking something it no longer had. The dog's fur, once a rich golden hue, was now dirty and patchy, its body thin, ribs showing through the fur, and its left leg held awkwardly, as if it had been injured and never healed properly. John's heart tugged as he took in the sight of the dog sitting there in the rain, its eyes following every movement of the people inside the bakery, hoping for something, anything. For a moment, he debated. He wasn't sure if he should do anything. It wasn't uncommon to see strays around the neighborhood, and while he had always had a soft spot for animals, he also knew that getting involved wasn't always easy. His bakery was his life, and his hands were already full with the daily responsibilities of running the shop. But there was something about the dog's stare that made John's decision for him. It wasn't just the dog's condition, it was the way it looked at him. As if it understood something about the man. It knew it needed help. But it wasn't asking for pity. It was waiting for something, someone, to notice, to care. And for some reason, at that very moment, John couldn't look away. John stepped out from behind the counter, his warm boots slapping against the cold floor as he moved toward the door. The chime above the door rang softly, but the dog didn't flinch. It just continued to sit there, watching him, its eyes never leaving John's face. He crouched down in front of the dog, the rain falling heavily around him, his heart racing as he studied the creature before him. The dog's fur was matted, its once glossy coat now dull and lifeless. Its body was frail, too thin for a dog of its size, and there was a deep sadness in the way it held itself, almost as if it was resigned to its fate. But even so, there was a quiet resilience in the dog's demeanor, a determination to survive, to endure, no matter what. The dog didn't move as John approached. It didn't cower or bark. It simply looked at him with those sad, tired eyes, waiting. For a long moment, John stayed still, his hand hovering just above the dog's head. He knew that animals like this had been through a lot, and trust didn't come easily. But something in the dog's eyes, something that spoke of a past that was far too painful for it to carry alone, made John reach out. He ran his hand gently over the dog's fur, feeling the cold, wet coat beneath his touch. The dog flinched slightly at first, but then relaxed, the tension in its body slowly easing as if it had been waiting for this contact all along. "It's all right," John whispered, his voice soft. "You're safe now." The words felt strange coming from his mouth. He didn't know why he was speaking to the dog this way. He wasn't sure if the dog even understood. But there was something about this moment, about this dog, that felt different. John knew this wasn't just a stray looking for food. This was an animal that had been through something. Something that had left it broken. Something that had taken away its trust in the world. And yet, despite all that, it still wanted to connect. It still wanted to believe that there was kindness in the world. That there was something worth living for. John didn't hesitate. He scooped the dog up in his arms, the small body shaking as he cradled it close to his chest. The dog's head rested against his shoulder, its body light and frail, its heart pounding in his ear. For a moment, John just stood there, holding the dog in the rain, the world around them continuing on in a blur. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was this small creature in his arms. This life that had been discarded and forgotten, now placed in his care. He could feel the dog's breath against his neck, shallow and labored, but there was something undeniably comforting about it. The dog was no longer alone. It had been seen. It had been heard. John carried the dog inside. the warmth of the bakery enveloping him both as he set the dog gently on the floor. He grabbed a towel and began to dry the dog's fur, his hands moving gently over the frail body, trying to ease away some of the cold and pain the dog had carried for so long. The dog didn't resist, simply lying still, allowing John to care for it. It was as though the dog had known that, for the first time in a long while, someone was taking care of it. Someone was willing to help. As the dog began to relax in the warmth of the bakery, John felt a pang of responsibility stir in his chest. He wasn't sure how this had happened, how a chance encounter with a stray had led him to take this dog in. But he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't just leave it there. This was more than a stray animal looking for food. This was a dog that had been abandoned, left behind when it was no longer useful to its previous owners. But now, it had a chance, it had a new beginning, and John was going to make sure it had the life it deserved. He decided then that he would take the dog to the vet the next day, get it the care it needed, and find it a proper home. Maybe it would stay with him, maybe it wouldn't, but he couldn't just let it go. Not when he saw the hope in its eyes. Not when he could feel the trust it was placing in him. For the first time in a long while, John felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The dog had found him, and in doing so, had shown him that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could make the biggest difference. Charlie's life began to change the moment John carried him into the bakery. The warmth of the shop, the comforting smell of freshly baked bread, and the gentle care from a stranger who now felt more like a savior than just a passerby offered Charlie something he hadn't known in a long time: hope. For the first time since the accident, since the days of abandonment, Charlie felt safe. The harsh city streets, the cold nights spent hiding in alleyways, and the gnawing hunger that had followed him for so long, seemed like a distant memory. John placed Charlie gently on a clean towel and immediately began tending to his wounds. He carefully cleaned the cuts on Charlie's legs, his sides, and around his ribs, his hands moving with tenderness that spoke volumes about the kind of person John was: compassionate, patient, and understanding. Charlie winced slightly as John applied a mild antiseptic to some of the deeper scratches. But there was no aggression, no pulling away. Charlie's body was worn, but his spirit, though bruised, still held the quiet hope that someone, anyone, would care. John gently wrapped a soft bandage around the leg that had been broken in the accident, the leg that still hurt every time Charlie tried to move. He spoke softly, reassuring the dog with calming words, even though he wasn't sure if Charlie fully understood. "You're safe now, buddy," John said with a smile, wiping his hands on a towel. "You're not going anywhere else. I promise." As the hours passed, Charlie began to relax. John fed him small portions of food, some warm meat from the bakery's kitchen and a bowl of water, which Charlie drank greedily, as if he hadn't had a proper meal in days. The food felt comforting, like a small taste of the care he had once known as a puppy, before the accident had shattered his world. After Charlie ate, he lay down on the towel John had set out for him, curling up and resting his tired body in the cozy corner of the bakery. The sound of the rain tapping against the windows was calming, and Charlie, for the first time in what felt like forever, allowed himself to drift into a peaceful sleep. John watched him for a while, his heart softening at the sight of the little dog. It was hard to imagine that this fragile creature had once been a joyful puppy, full of life and energy. But now, with a little care, Charlie was beginning to heal. As the days passed, Charlie continued to improve. His wounds slowly healed, and the dullness in his eyes began to fade, replaced by a glimmer of life and curiosity. Though his legs still hurt and he walked with a slight limp, Charlie's health was returning, and so was his spirit. He would follow John around the bakery, watching him with eager eyes as he prepared the bread. The smell of fresh loaves filling the air. The dog's eyes were always gentle, always kind, but there was a noticeable shift in his demeanor. The fear that had once gripped him so tightly was beginning to loosen, replaced by the trust that he had not known in so long. John noticed how Charlie would sit by the door, patiently waiting for customers to come in, watching them with a calmness that had been absent in his earlier days on the streets. There was a quiet dignity in the way Charlie carried himself now, as if he had finally realized that he was no longer just a stray, no longer forgotten. He was part of something bigger now. He was a part of a family. As the weeks passed, Charlie's transformation became even more remarkable. He no longer hesitated when John called his name or when John reached out to pet him. The puppy who had once been so wary of people, so quick to pull away, was now leaning into John's touch, enjoying the simple pleasure of being loved. Charlie had learned to trust again, and in doing so, he had learned that there was kindness in the world. John found himself growing fond of the little dog, not just because of his resilience but because of the way Charlie had become a steady presence in the bakery. They were companions now, each relying on the other in a way that felt natural and unspoken. Charlie was no longer a stray in John's eyes. He was family. There was a bond forming between them, one that transcended the need for words. Charlie followed John around the bakery, sitting by his feet as he worked, always nearby, always watching. When customers came in, Charlie greeted them with a wagging tail, his friendly eyes and quiet demeanor making him the perfect companion for John. The little dog had found his place, and so had John. They were two beings who had found each other by chance, but the connection between them was undeniable. John noticed how Charlie had begun to settle into the routine of the bakery. He would accompany John on his early morning trips to the market, his limp now less pronounced as he walked by his side. Charlie had learned to navigate the streets again, not with fear or desperation, but with a calm confidence that spoke of his newfound security. He was no longer just surviving. He was living. As time went on, the connection between John and Charlie only deepened. John began to treat Charlie like the true companion he was. Not just a dog, but a friend. He made sure Charlie had everything he needed: fresh water, soft bedding, and plenty of food. But more than that, John gave Charlie something even more important: his time, his affection, and his loyalty. In return, Charlie gave John the same. His gentle presence was a constant reminder of the simple joys in life, how small acts of kindness could change everything, how resilience could bring about healing, and how love had the power to restore even the most broken of souls. It was clear to John that Charlie had endured something profound. His past had been one of neglect, abandonment, and pain, but those days were behind him. Charlie had emerged from the darkness of his former life, not with bitterness or fear, but with an open heart. And it was that heart, that quiet strength, that made him such a remarkable companion. He was not just a dog, he was a testament to the power of perseverance and the healing that could come from compassion. Over time, John realized that he had grown attached to Charlie in ways he hadn't expected. He had started to think of Charlie as more than just a pet. Charlie had become his partner, his friend, and a member of his family. Their lives were intertwined now, each bringing something unique and valuable to the other. And as Charlie continued to recover, physically, emotionally, John began to see that the dog was not just healing in body, but also in spirit. Charlie had come to him broken, abandoned, and fearful, but now he was whole again, his heart open and full of love. He had found a family, and in turn, John had found something he hadn't even realized he needed: a companion who would stand by his side through thick and thin. Charlie was no longer just a stray dog, he was a loyal friend. a reminder of the power of love, and the joy that came with the unexpected bonds that life sometimes offered. Together, they were building a life of healing, hope, and connection. Charlie's life had transformed in ways he could never have imagined. Once a broken, abandoned puppy, left to roam the streets in search of scraps, he was now a cherished companion, thriving in the warmth of John's bakery. His days were no longer filled with hunger, pain, or loneliness. Instead, he had found a purpose, a sense of belonging, and, most importantly, love. With each passing day, Charlie's confidence grew. He was no longer the timid, fearful dog who had cowered at the sight of strangers, but a proud and joyful friend who greeted everyone with a wagging tail and a gentle demeanor. His eyes, once dull with sadness, now sparkled with the happiness that came from knowing he was wanted, cared for, and loved. Charlie had found his place in the world, and in doing so, he had found his purpose. He was no longer a stray dog wandering aimlessly through life. He was John's loyal companion, his constant shadow, the heart of the bakery. Charlie's days were filled with little moments of joy, playing with customers who adored him, sitting by John's feet as he worked, and exploring the streets with his owner during their daily trips to the market. The bond between them had grown unbreakable, rooted in mutual trust, respect, and affection. Charlie's role in John's life had become more than just that of a pet. He was a friend, a confidant, a source of comfort and joy. He had become a part of John's family, and in return, John had become Charlie's safe haven, the place where he could finally rest, heal, and thrive. But Charlie's story didn't end there. As word spread of the once abandoned dog's miraculous transformation, Charlie became a symbol of resilience, hope, and the power of second chances. People who had visited the bakery saw Charlie, now healthy and happy, and heard his story. They marveled at how a small act of kindness had given a dog a new life. The story of his rescue, his healing, and his bond with John resonated deeply with many. It reminded people of the importance of compassion and the incredible impact that even the smallest acts of kindness could have on the lives of those who had been forgotten. Charlie's story began to inspire more than just the regular customers of John's bakery. It became a story that sparked change in the community, encouraging others to reach out and help animals in need. People started bringing in donations, offering supplies, and even volunteering their time to help stray animals in the area. John realized that the transformation he had witnessed in Charlie was something worth sharing. Something that could make a difference for other animals who had been abandoned or neglected. As Charlie's popularity grew, so did John's determination to make a lasting impact. He decided to open a charitable foundation aimed at helping animals in need, particularly those who had been abandoned or left to suffer. The foundation, which he named Charlie's Hope, was designed to raise awareness about the plight of stray animals, provide medical care, and offer a safe space for those in need. John used the story of Charlie's rescue as the foundation's cornerstone, sharing it with the world as a testament to the power of compassion, care, and the deep connection between humans and animals. The foundation quickly gained traction. Donations flowed in, and volunteers from the community rallied to help support the cause. John worked tirelessly to ensure that Charlie's legacy lived on, that the spirit of compassion and kindness that had transformed Charlie's life would now be shared with other animals who needed a second chance. Charlie's influence was far-reaching. He was no longer just the dog in the bakery, the loyal companion who helped John get through each day. He had become the face of hope, the embodiment of the idea that no one, no animal, was beyond redemption. His story had shown people that even in the darkest of circumstances, there was always the potential for change, for healing, and for new beginnings. As the years passed, Charlie continued to live happily with John, always by his side as they worked together to make a difference in the lives of animals who had been left behind. The bakery became not just a place to buy bread, but a symbol of hope, a place where people could come together to support a cause that mattered. John and Charlie had created something beautiful together, a lasting legacy of love, kindness, and the transformative power of compassion. Charlie had found his family, and through his story, he had brought people together, inspiring them to act with kindness and to believe in the possibility of change. The foundation grew, helping more and more animals find the care and love they deserved. Charlie's influence spread, touching the lives of countless people who were inspired by his journey from pain to healing. From abandonment to belonging, John knew that the work they had started would continue long after they were gone. That the story of Charlie would live on as a reminder of the importance of caring for those in need, of seeing the potential for goodness in every living being. No matter their past, Charlie's story wasn't just one of survival, it was a testament to the power of second chances, the beauty of unconditional love, and the incredible connection that could be formed between humans and animals. It was a story that reminded people that no matter how broken or lost one might feel, there was always the possibility of healing, of finding a purpose, and of being part of something greater than oneself. In the end, Charlie had found his home, not just in the bakery, but in the hearts of everyone who heard his story, and through his journey, he had helped others find their purpose, too. The story of Charlie, the abandoned puppy who had found his place in the world, had become a legacy. A beacon of hope for animals and humans alike, showing that with love, patience, and kindness, anything was possible.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.